I want to ask you some questions. How do you feel today? Seriously, how do you feel? Does your mood and energy levels swing up and down? Are you depressed? Do you sleep poorly? Do you feel tired but wired? Do you depend on coffee in the morning just to wake up and maybe a few glasses of wine at night to calm down every day? Do you feel frustrated because you misplace objects or forget names? Do you suffer from brain fog? Do you find it hard to focus on tasks? Do you feel your energy diminishing as the days go on? If you do, you're not alone. This is how most Americans feel. In fact, I'd say we have an epidemic on our hands. Psychiatric disorders affect 26% of our adult population. That's over 60 million Americans. Over 20% of children have some type of psychiatric disorder. Over 40 million people have anxiety, and more than 20 million people have depression. 1 in 10 Americans takes an antidepressant. The use of antidepressants has tripled in the last decade. Alzheimer's disease will affect 30%, and some experts say up to 50% of the people over 85, which is the fastest growing segment of our population and will affect 106 million people by 2050. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, is a label we now give to almost 9% of children between the ages of 8 and 15. Autism rates have increased in children from 3 in 10,000 to 1 in 166 and more. That's an 11-fold increase in the last decade. Learning disabilities affect between 5 and 10% of school-age children. These statistics are grim, and the indirect costs to society for these brain disorders are mammoth. They include loss of productivity at school, at home, or in the workplace, accounting for a loss of over $80 billion a year. I call this an epidemic of broken brains. I'm Dr. Mark Hyman. I'm a practicing functional medicine physician. I'm also the director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, and chairman of the board of the Institute for Functional Medicine. I'm also a 10-time New York Times bestselling author. Brain health is an important topic and a personal topic for me. And I'd like to take you on a journey to help you understand why. I first began to discover the mysteries of the brain when I personally got sick. And I went from being very healthy, riding my bike 100 miles a day, being able to memorize 30 patients' charts and dictate them all flawlessly at the end of the day, to barely being able to walk up the stairs and not remembering where I was at the end of a sentence when I got there. And it happened almost overnight. And it happened, as I realized, because my whole system broke down from a number of insults that I wasn't aware of. It was pretty startling to be highly functional, highly capable of operating in the world, to being almost debilitated. I was really unable to function in any real way, and my brain wasn't working. I had trouble with remembering things. I had severe ADD. I couldn't focus on anything. I had memory issues. And because no one had really figured out what it was, I sort of struggled from doctor to doctor to doctor. And I went to see the psychiatrist who wanted to give me antidepressants. I saw the neurologist who wanted to give me other drugs. And it was just like a whole series of different doctors and a whole series of different drugs. And I realized that I wasn't really depressed, I wasn't really demented, I wasn't really having ADD, that something was wrong and that I needed to figure it out. I was told I had chronic fatigue syndrome, which means nothing other than you're tired and feel lousy all the time. I was told I had depression. I was told I was stressed and was recommended to take anti-anxiety medications. So I was given antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, ADD medications, and none of them really helped because I didn't deal with the root cause. And so I was very frustrated because they gave me all these labels, but they didn't actually tell me what was wrong with me. It was like I knew that something was real and it wasn't just depression or stress, because I was fine one minute and I wasn't the next minute. So when physicians said that to me, when my doctors told me I was depressed or had ADD or I needed medication, or I was anxious, it made me angry because I felt that I was given these labels, but I was given no roadmap to get better. And I realized that as physicians, we're trained to actually label people and often tell them it's psychological when it's very physical. Because we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to find the answer, and we don't know the questions to ask, so we just assume, well, if you're having all these vague symptoms, it must be in your head. And I knew it wasn't, although it was affecting my head, it wasn't in my head. Our broken brains cause many problems, such as anxiety, depression, bipolar disease, personality disorders, addictions, obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit disorder, autism, Asperger's syndrome, learning difficulties, and dyslexia. They take many shapes, including psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, and all the neurodegenerative diseases of aging, especially Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's disease. In episode 1 of the Broken Brain docuseries, I brought together some of the world's leading brain and health experts to talk about the increase of broken brain syndrome. Just how bad is this epidemic? Let's find out.
Well, for the most part, when you look at statistics for all types of neurodegenerative diseases, they're all on the rise. And we know that all developmental disorders are on the rise. And if you look at childhood developmental disorders, there's some stats that are saying that 1 out of 8 children in the US have some type of developmental delay, whether it's dyslexia or autism or attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. So it's really an epidemic, and it's really growing, and we're not really doing anything to change that.
In addition, there are brain problems that fall on the lighter side of the broken brain continuum. And while many psychiatrists and neurologists wouldn't qualify these problems as treatable diseases, they still cause unnecessary suffering for so many. These problems include chronic stress, lack of focus, poor concentration, brain fog, anger, mood swings, sleep problems, or just feeling a little bit anxious or depressed most of the time.
The statistics are grim, no matter what way you slice them. In terms of disability, depression is the top cause of disability worldwide. It is going to be, or already is, the top cause of disability in America. When you look at the most common mental health disorders in America, something like 40 million Americans have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And then just look at things like there's now 60,000 overdoses in the opioid crisis. There were 40,000 suicides last year. These numbers are growing.
Have you ever wondered if you had a broken brain? Sometimes it's not obvious and doesn't show up in the form of dementia, ADHD, or depression. Maybe you fear losing your job because you're tired, unfocused, and inattentive, and your memory is failing so you can't properly perform your tasks at work. Do you see your relationships breaking down because you're mentally or emotionally absent or numb? Perhaps you struggle to focus to help your children with their homework and guide them through life, but end up feeling as though you aren't living up to your duties as a parent. Do you lie awake at night, tormented by the grief and pain of living half a life, and then worry about how you'll find a way to wake up early in the morning just so you can get your kids to school? Do you forget to meet your friends or go to appointments and then you can't figure out how in the world you forgot? These are symptoms of a broken brain that many of us are familiar with.
The symptoms of poor brain function, to a great degree, depends on the person. So for example, if someone had an incredible memory 2 years ago, and now their memory is just average, that's a brain dysfunction, right? If someone now is feeling anxiety that they've never felt before, and there's a change, well, there's a change in the brain. So all of these factors have to be taken into account in a very individualized, personalized way. But in general, if your brain is functioning well, if you have a sense of vitality and optimism, and your cognition is clear. You don't have to be the most brilliant person in the world. You don't have to have a memory that's just amazing. You just have to feel that everything is falling into groove, that all parts of the brain are focused in the same direction. There's just the right amount of resistance, right amount of stress, and the brain kind of is nourished by it. That everything falls into place. And the ability to overcome a certain degree of stress in a healthy way. That's the way the brain really should work.
For so long, we thought that the brain was unchangeable, that once our brain started to break down, we were stuck with it. Even worse, we thought that once the brain started to deteriorate, it was all downhill from there. We now know that this is not true, and that our brains are indeed changeable. This is the revolutionary idea of neuroplasticity.
So neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change throughout life. It was once believed that, the human adult brain reached its peak level of performance at around age 25, only to begin sort of a slow decline until death. And if you were a person that developed dementia or had a learning disability, there was not a whole lot that you could do to improve the way your brain worked. As of the early 90s, if I recall correctly, we now know that the human brain is able to grow new brain cells in the memory center of the brain throughout life. And this is something that was previously considered impossible. We're able to make new connections, we're able to, quote unquote, rewire the brain under certain circumstances. And, this is something that I think is profoundly empowering, that our brains are actually plastic. Neuroplasticity really, what that implies is that the brain, rather than being like this sort of static thing carved out of stone that we really inherited and couldn't do much to change, is actually more like plastic. It's malleable. And the way that we can sort of change the way it functions and manipulate it is through our diets and through our lifestyles. And eating a brain-healthy diet really promotes the neuroplasticity of your brain. Neuroplasticity tends to decline with age, but it's not necessarily inevitable. We can really have a positive impact on our brain health and our neuroplasticity at any age. And the research really shows this, thankfully, now. So, again, it's a profoundly important idea, and I think, at the end of the day, in real human terms, what that means is that we're no longer helpless. We no longer have to settle for the brain that we think we have. We can transform our brains at any age into our biological best, whatever that means for you, whatever that means for me. It's different for everybody, but at least at this point, we don't have to sit on our hands.
Probably 15, 20 years ago, I think most neurologists would probably have concluded, you're born with X, and that's sort of what you got until you die. Oh boy, is that not true. Your brain learns and takes in and gathers new information and learns new tasks and skills until literally the moment you die. It's always ever-changing, always growing, always trying to take care of its best self. It's always in action.
In your career, you've been focused on brain healing. You wrote a book about brain healing. And the question I have is, what are the advances in our thinking and practice around brain healing that can help people recover their brain function?
Sure. Well, the first one is that it's okay for you to say brain healing, because for about 400 years, the words brain and healing really weren't used in the same sentence. And that's because neuroscientists, going all the way back to Descartes, always conceived of the brain as some kind of complex machine. He saw it as a hydraulic machine. The discovery of electricity led people to start talking about the brain as though it was hardwired, a hardwired machine, with circuits. We still talk about circuits. And the development of a computer has led people to talk about the brain as though it's a computer, and it's a form of computer hardware. Now, the problem with this machine metaphor is people forget it's a metaphor. Machines do many glorious things, but they don't grow new parts. They don't change or reorganize themselves. They don't heal. And this metaphor,
I wish my computer healed when it wasn't working.
Yeah. So this metaphor basically gave rise to what I've called the doctrine of the unchanging brain. And clinically, it gave rise to a neurological nihilism, just a belief that when something's broken, there's nothing that can be done. And I can't emphasize how powerful that's been, even though we've discovered that the brain is neuroplastic now. In everyday mainstream clinical practice, people still frequently behave as though it's a machine. And so, first of all, just attacking, undermining, exposing the impoverished nature of that metaphor has led us to be able to stand back and try new things. So what have we learned about the brain? Literally thousands of experiments have now shown that it's a use it or lose it brain, that circuitry develops and has to be maintained to some degree. We've learned that plasticity within the brain is competitive, meaning that if you develop a certain area for a particular mental function, and then you don't use it for a long period of time, other mental functions will start taking over that cortical real estate, if you will, and using it.
To learn how to fix your brain, you're going to have to accept a radically new way of thinking about health, one that most doctors today still struggle to understand. It's the idea that everything is connected. This means everything we do, everything we eat and think, how we sleep and live can actually change our brain at any given moment. Your entire body, including all of the core systems within it, interact as a single, sophisticated symphony. You are one whole person, and all the pieces of your biology and your unique genetic code interact with your environment to determine how sick or well you are in this moment. This means your body and mind are connected as well. The body and the mind are a single, dynamic, bidirectional system. What you do to one has enormous impact on the other. What you do to your body, you do to your brain. That means it is possible to heal your body and thereby heal your brain. We know that your thoughts, beliefs, your attitudes, traumas, life experiences directly influence your biology. We know that stress and other psychological factors can have a major impact on your health. We now understand that 95% of all illness is either caused by or worsened by stress. What you think can influence how sick or well you are. The mind influences the body. This is known as mind-body medicine. And sadly, most physicians do not apply this knowledge in their practices even though they're aware of it. They understand that the connection is there, but rather than using the power of the mind to heal, most conventional practitioners feel that people with psychological influences on their health have psychosomatic illness, meaning that their physical symptoms are all in their head. The practice of somatopsychic medicine, or understanding how the body affects the mind, is hardly on the radar. The body directly and powerfully influences the brain, and that means that nutritional status, hormonal imbalances, food allergies, toxins, digestive and immune and metabolic imbalances all influence our mood, our behavior, our attention, and our attitude. You already know about this body-mind connection, even if you've never consciously considered it. Just take a moment to think about how your own body has affected your mind over your lifetime. Have you ever felt anxious, irritable, jittery, fearful, or even had a panic attack for no apparent reason, and then quickly reached for a can of soda or a chocolate chip muffin and then felt better right away? Why were you so anxious in the first place? Probably because your blood sugar was plummeting, and when the blood sugar plummets, your body is programmed to respond as though it's in a life-threatening situation. Have you ever felt stressed or anxious and then taken a long walk or ridden your bike a few miles only to feel calm and relaxed afterwards? Ever wonder why this happens? When you are feeling stressed, your body produces adrenaline and cortisol, the stress chemicals that make you feel anxious. When you exercise, you burn those stress chemicals off and your body returns to its normal state. Have you ever felt angry and irritable because you've been deprived of sleep? Have you ever felt happier and that you had fewer health problems after a great night's sleep? Can't say enough about 8 hours of solid, restful sleep.
I had had a life which was one of extreme stress. I have, I think, lifelong high cortisol levels. My main symptom that brought me to Dr. Hyman was the extreme fatigue. But there was a certain amount of memory loss going on that I felt was probably connected to whatever was happening to me. And not only do I feel that has reversed, but because there's been some Alzheimer's in the family, therefore I signed up with the NYU Langone Center to be part of they have an aging and dementia center where you join their brain study, and I did that so that should I have that particular kind of deterioration, I would have resources to advise me. I thought it was a good precaution, and so I go yearly to be tested. And at one point, they told me that I had actually improved. The change was absolutely in weeks. I mean, like maybe even within by 2-3 weeks, I was feeling, much better. And I have to say that I have tremendous gratitude because it wasn't like I underwent heart surgery or something like that. But on the other hand, I had no life. And I was in, really quite bad shape. And Dr. Hyman gave me back that life. I'm 68. I work full time. I'm not expecting to retire. And I can do that because I have my health.
These are basic examples of the body-mind connection that many of us have experienced. But there are so many other things that occur inside of you that affect your brain and your mind. So now let's bring this back to the importance of somatopsychic medicine, something I've experienced the power of both as a doctor and as a patient. For a number of years, going to doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, to Columbia, to Harvard, to all the greatest minds in the country who I thought specialized in what I had. And I got no answers. And then one day, a nutritionist at Kenya Ranch invited me to a lecture by a Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's a nutritional biochemist, studied with Linus Pauling. And I listened to him speak, and he painted an entire new view of medicine, an entirely new view of disease. And I said to myself, either this guy's crazy or he's a genius. And if what he's saying is true, then I owe it to myself and my patients to learn about it. And that's when I took a deep dive, first applying everything to myself, and incrementally I got better and peeled the layers of what was wrong with me using the roadmap of functional medicine, which doesn't really just look at symptoms, but looks at causes and understands the body as a whole dynamic integrated system where everything affects everything and everything's connected. So because my brain was affected, the problem wasn't in my brain, the problem was in my body and all the inflammation and the toxicity and the gut dysfunction that was then feeding back up to my brain. And once I understood that, I was able to apply the principles of functional medicine and get myself better. This series tells the story not only of my own healing, but also the stories of numerous experts and patients who were able to make miraculous recoveries from a broken brain.
I moved into an office building where my office actually was right next door to the janitor's supply room. So I actually had an adjoining wall with the janitor's supply room where they had all the cleaning chemicals for the building. And slowly, over a course of 5 months, I started to get just more sensitive and more sick. And I went to a lot of well-meaning practitioners, both in the medical field and alternative practitioners, and I was diagnosed with toxic overload. So I started to do whatever I could to detoxify and clean my system. Yet, unfortunately, even though I did every protocol that was recommended, I continued to get more sick. In the beginning, I became sensitive to perfumes and colognes and things like that. And then it escalated to cleaning products. And then it escalated to chronic pain. Then it escalated to depression. And then at one point, I couldn't actually walk down my street anymore because if someone was doing their laundry and I was walking outside and walking by someone's laundry fumes, I might go into seizures. So it became really difficult to navigate my life because I couldn't actually go anywhere anymore. Illness is a really good motivator, and I recognize that of all the well-meaning physicians and people that I went to for answers, that no one actually had an answer for me. So I started to research the brain because intuitively I knew that I had some form of brain injury.
I didn't want to really study medicine because I didn't really agree with the philosophies and the framework of conventional medicine. I didn't want to study in a lab. I studied biology. And so I did what any confused 20-year-old would do. I moved to Japan. And it was in Japan, I was teaching English to little kids. And one day I was driving home from work. I was on my scooter. And out of nowhere, this lady hit me, and it was very traumatic. Like, I flew 10 feet through the air, and I ended up breaking 3 ribs, dislocating my shoulder. I had a road rash, and I suffered a mild concussion. But at the time, I actually didn't even know that because I didn't know what a concussion was. And I tried everything. I was in chronic pain. I tried conventional medicine. I tried painkillers. I tried physical therapy, and nothing worked. And so I was at a point where I was pretty much giving up hope because I couldn't do any of the things that I loved doing anymore. And thankfully, at that time, my brother, he was already practicing natural medicine. And so I went home for a vacation. And before that point, it's just like, you hear natural medicine or functional medicine or chiropractic, you're like, well, I was like, I don't really trust those quacks, It's just what we're taught. Especially I came from a family of medical doctors and nurses, and so that was the paradigm. But I was at this point where, and it's funny now because patients come to me all the time and they're just like, I'll try anything, And so I was at that point and I went, and after a few treatments with him and some lifestyle recommendations, dietary changes, supplements, like my pain was gone. It was like 3 sessions. Yeah, I was just like blown away. And it's in my nature, I'm a curious person. Like when something happens like that, I want to figure out why. Like how did that happen, number one? And how can I take this information and share it with others?
I had head trauma, a brain injury, and that left me with learning challenges all through school, all through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so how did that manifest? I couldn't understand things like everybody else did. Teachers would have to repeat themselves 4 or 5 times, and then I would just have to pretend I understood. I had no focus. I had a very horrible memory, and it actually took me an extra 3 years to learn how to read. And so I grew up with these learning challenges. And I remember a few years after that, when I was about 9 years old, I overheard one of my teachers talk to another adult thinking I wasn't paying attention, pointing to me saying, "That's the boy with the broken brain." And that's where and when you're a child, that really leaves an impression. And so that was my identity growing up.
I'm an academic internal medicine doc. In 2000, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And being an academic doc, I thought I should treat my disease aggressively, so I sought out the best MS center I could find, the Cleveland Clinic, took the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, my disease had converted to secondary progressive MS.
Which is not good.
Which is not good at all, because that means you're going to go steadily downhill, that functions once lost are gone forever. And so that is when I took mitoxantrone, a form of chemotherapy. Then I took Tysabri, the new biologic agent.
To suppress your immune system.
To suppress my immune system, and I continued to decline. That is when I realized, conventional medicine is not stopping this decline. I was on track to quite potentially becoming bedridden by my illness, potentially demented by my illness. MS-related pain was a big part of my illness, and that was getting more and more difficult to control, so I was worried that refractory pain was going to be a big factor. And so that's when I went back to reading the medical literature and would discover the ancestral health movement. I would discover vitamins and supplements. I would discover the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I would integrate all of that into a comprehensive diet and lifestyle program that not only stopped my decline, which was pretty incredible, but to my amazement and the amazement of my physicians, was associated with a remarkable return of function.
I'm so grateful to all of my amazing friends and colleagues and patients who've joined forces with me to get this important information out to you. On behalf of all of us, I have a sincere hope that this Broken Brain docuseries will bring you the life-altering information you need to take back your health. We know that the information we are sharing can change your life. We love hearing from you, and we want to know about your own experiences with brain health. Make sure to let us know how much insight you're getting by leaving a comment and sharing your experiences. I want you to ponder these questions. Can lifelong depression be cured? Can children completely recover from autism? Can dementia be reversed? Conventional medical wisdom says no. We don't see many cases in the medical literature where people recover from autism, reverse dementia, or are cured from lifelong depression. But just because psychiatrists and neurologists aren't reporting the dramatic recoveries like these by employing normal methods used to treat these disorders does not mean that disorders like these are not treatable. In conventional approaches, partial relief of symptoms is sometimes possible. Conventional medicine often likes to use a pill for every ill. As long as we can name it and blame it, then they can treat it with medication. But really, they're often just covering over symptoms temporarily instead of treating the cause. The emphasis on naming diseases is pervasive throughout medicine, not just in psychiatry and neurology. And it is the single biggest obstacle to changing the way we do things and finding the answers to our health problems. Conventional treatment for mental disorders goes like this. You have depression, so you need an antidepressant. You are anxious, so you need an anti-anxiety medication. You have bipolar disease or mood swings, so you need a mood stabilizer.
I was diagnosed with ADD and depression, and it's like, oh my God, it was just everything all at once. So I had to sort of reassess and say, okay, how do I start over again, learn how to be healthy, piece my life together? I tried to address my health issues, but honestly, most of the doctors that I saw didn't, it's the old thing of they'll take a symptom and they'll give you a pill for the symptom. And they didn't know how to sort of say, what's the overall picture of this human being, I began to realize I had to sort this out for myself because I never got a clear answer. If I went to see a mental health counselor, they didn't know anything about weight loss. And if I went to see a doctor about weight loss, they didn't know anything about mental health, and they would just put me on antidepressants, which they did.
Institutions gain from this model. The question becomes, why does the healthcare industry separate diseases into specialties? The answer, our medical institutions and our financial reimbursement systems are founded on outdated ideas of separate diseases and medical specialties. Abandoning these ideas threatens their economic viability and perhaps even their existence. And our medical training reinforces the illusion of separate body systems by training doctors in specialties and subspecialties. There are doctors for every inch of your body, but very few who understand the whole body and how it works as one complete ecosystem.
Medicine, from my perspective, because of some of the changes with HMOs and the whole insurance industry, has gone to more of an algorithmic approach to taking care of people. Now, when I say that, what exactly do I mean? You come in with a problem with depression, and so I say, okay, here, try this antidepressant. It doesn't work, so what do? Well, here's the next antidepressant on the list. If that doesn't work, well, let's try the third or the fourth or the fifth, or maybe after the fourth time it's not working, maybe we switch to a mood stabilizer or something else. So there's not so much a lot of thinking about what's going on and what's causing this person to feel or think the way they are. It's more, if something doesn't help, then try the next, medication on the list. In contrast, the functional approach really asks more deeper, probing, and from my perspective, thinking questions, which most doctors have spent a lot of time learning, and we might as well get the best out of their brains to help people get better.
The biggest challenge with our medical system and the way they see brain disorders is they think brain disorders are separate departments. So you go to the neurologist or the psychiatrist in his own separate category, in his own separate department in the hospital. You can't separate what's going on in the brain with what's going on in the body. In fact, most of the problems I see that affect us emotionally, psychologically, or in the brain per se, the problem is actually not coming from the brain. The problem is often coming from the gut or somewhere else. So we have a system where a symptom affects one organ system, and you go to that specialist for that particular organ, when the problem is not originating with that particular organ system. So you get given a drug for that particular organ system, but you're not treating the underlying imbalance or dysfunction, and ultimately you're not treating the cause, which is usually not where the problem presents.
What has happened is that we are practicing medicine that's a century out of date, basically. While things have moved forward in Silicon Valley and things have moved forward with iPhones, and look at what you can do today that you couldn't do even 10 or 15 years ago. Medicine is still being practiced an old-fashioned way where we look for a specific diagnosis. We ask what? What is it? Is it measles? Is it a broken bone? Is it rheumatic fever? What is it? And then for each thing, what it is, we get the right prescription, we give them the right thing to do it. That's not the way physiology works. So what we need to do then is to ask in 21st century medicine, instead of to ask what it is, to ask why it is. What are all the contributors? And so we need to close what I call the complexity gap. So, for example, you have a computer that can fly a plane, for example. You have to match the program with with what is required for the plane, with the complexity of what it takes. Now in medicine, we have a tremendous gap. We have human organisms that are incredibly complex. They have complex chronic illnesses like neurodegeneration. And what do we ask? Serum sodium, serum potassium, a few things like this. It doesn't come close to addressing it. Therefore, what do we come away with? The idea that these diseases that are complex chronic illnesses are ineluctable. You can't stop them, you can't see them coming, there's nothing you can do. What that is wrong. If you use larger data sets, if you look further at what is actually driving the problem, and we can see this from the laboratory research, here are the things that actually drive the problem. Then you can see that in fact there are specific contributors, and it's virtually never one. It's a combination of contributors that add up to an overall change that leads to a complex chronic illness, like one we would call Alzheimer's disease.
Traditional medicine is a single intervention, a drug or treatment
Yeah.
for a single outcome. You give this drug, you give this therapy, it works for autism. That's failed miserably for everything, including
For
Alzheimer's.
many reasons, yeah.
And so you're talking about multiple interventions, working on different aspects of brain dysfunction, whether it's diet, exercise, sleep, light, sound, taste,
Yeah.
movement. All these things are ways of accessing the brain that have really been neglected and almost ignored in conventional medicine.
Well, I think it's fair to say ignored would be a polite way to talk about it, the kinds of dismissals, because it doesn't fit with certain models. The one is a machine. Or really,
randomized controlled trials.
Well, the issue here is this, that much of modern medicine is taught as though these problems are all linear, like one billiard ball hits another, which hits another, which hits another, which hits another. But these systems are not linear systems. They're constantly reciprocally interacting, and there's emergent orders and so on and so forth. And then the other thing is we have our genetic variation, but neuroplasticity shows us that our brains all wire up slightly differently, so we're all very different. And the idea, I mean, you say you have a brain, but of course you could easily say in your skull are 150 different organs. I mean, that would be a more reasonable way of talking about the brain, because there's so many different functional sort of parts, and they can all link up and de-link.
It's a network.
Yes, but it's the most dynamic network that we know about, because it can constantly reformulate itself. So that's another very important point for all of medicine, of course, but particularly for dealing with something as sophisticated as the brain, which is these linear models are not the appropriate model. You need complexity theory to address these things, and you need to understand that every brain injury is different. I mean, two brain injuries have as much in common, for instance, as two bombed out sites do from 30,000 feet. Yeah. But in one city, they took out the electrical grid and the harbor, and the other city, they took out the residential areas, and the financial district. Like up close, brain injuries are different. Yeah. And so the idea of, let's say we wanted to study an intervention for a brain injury. Not only is the damage different, in other words, two different people in two car accidents are hit in different parts of the head. Neuroplastically, they wired up so that they perform functions in different parts. One person was an alcoholic, does lots of drugs, hasn't exercised for 25 years, has a low IQ, and never completes anything, and the other person has none of those things. Right. The same intervention, to put those different people, to put together apples, oranges, figs, rotten figs, pomegranates together and just say, well, they all have brain injury, and we're going to do one thing for all these people. I mean, that's just a fiction. That's not science.
How do we find the cause of this epidemic? Are we as humans defectively designed? Or is it our toxic environment, our nutrient-depleted diet, and unremitting stress affecting our sensitive brains? Is it the result of imbalances in our body? Are more drugs really the answer? Or is there a way to address the underlying causes of this epidemic so that we can regain our mental health and live whole, functional, fulfilling lives?
So functional medicine is not a sexy term, but I like to tell patients that it's really about creating health as opposed to treating disease. Because when patients come to doctors, they come in usually with some kind of symptom. I have pain, I'm tired, I'm overweight, I can't remember, whatever. And then you're sort of, say, here, take this pill, try this, see if it works, without asking the question, well, what kinds of things are you doing, or what kind of things are you not doing that's causing you to go down this path of ill health? Because our bodies are really incredibly designed to have resiliency, and we also have health built into it.
There was a lot of time in medical school and right after medical school where I was really questioning my decision. I was doing a lot of acute care medicine, and we weren't really focusing on nutrition and prevention. And I was frustrated. I was absolutely frustrated with medicine and questioning significantly what I got myself into. So when I found functional medicine, it was great because I could say, okay, I can do this type of medicine. I really appreciate this type of medicine. I see how this type of medicine works. And it was that great map so I could continue to practice medicine in a way that I felt fulfilled.
I like to say to my patients when they ask what is functional medicine, I tell them, and I do what the Lipitor commercial says to do. And that is, after a trial of diet and lifestyle, consider Lipitor. Well, if you do the diet and lifestyle right, you rarely need the Lipitor. Functional medicine is asking a fundamentally different question. In conventional medicine, we're asking what? What's the diagnosis? So once you have the diagnosis, there is sort of a prescribed set of treatments based on algorithms. In functional medicine, we're asking why. So an individual might have heart disease. And okay, so how do you treat heart disease conventionally? Well, you might use some kind of cholesterol-lowering medicine. You might send them to a cath lab and they get a stent or whatever. But in functional medicine, the question is, why do you have heart disease and someone else doesn't? We know that more than half of people with heart disease have normal cholesterol, so clearly it's not just cholesterol. So asking these why questions gets underneath the symptoms and underneath the conventional diagnosis to more personalized medicine. One person with heart disease might have a problem with the way they process folic acid, and they have a high homocysteine that causes a problem. Another person might have high inflammatory markers and so on. And interestingly enough, if you have 4 people with heart disease, they might all 4 have different underlying whys, whereas 4 people with 4 different diagnoses might have the same underlying why. So it becomes less about the diagnosis and much more about the individual's relationship with their environment. By environment, I mean their diet, their lifestyle, their thoughts, their beliefs, their community, their purpose, their sense of belonging. All of those things impact our health. So when thinking about neurological conditions, whether it's autism or Parkinson's or even MS or dementias of various kinds, there are clearly many different causes. And trying to ferret out the underlying cause and managing that cause is really a much more powerful intervention. Sometimes infectious disease can be an underlying cause. There's evidence that a significant fraction of people with dementia actually have some tick-borne illness, like Lyme or Bartonella or some other tick-borne disease, so treating that can be helpful. Other people have abnormalities of their intracellular metabolism, so we measure their B12 in their blood and it looks fine, but when we measure markers that tell us about how well B12 works inside the cells, it turns out to be abnormal. So looking broader than just the diagnosis is often a much more powerful way to intervene.
Now, medical thinking is what I call name it, blame it, tame it, prescription pad medicine. Patient comes in and says, I have this for a couple of years now. Oh, you have such and such. That disease is the cause of your problem. Right away, that's stupid because the diseases don't cause the problem. The problem simply needs a name, but the problem is the details. So you blame the name for the problem. Like your problem, like you come in and you say, you feel sad. So, well, you have depression. Depression is the cause. Now we have a pill that is for your depression. So you tame it with a prescription. So we call it name it, blame it, tame it, prescription pad medicine. That's my snide way of describing the medicine that I was trained to do back at Yale in the 1960s. Whereas the functional medicine that I practice now is we call principle-based medicine. It's based on a few fundamental principles, really quite simple. And they are that everybody's an individual. That's so important, that every living thing on the planet is an individual. I mean, that's the way it was created. If it's God who created, that was God's design. If evolution created it, it's the way evolution did it, to make everything unique. So then, if that's the case, then your approach has to be toward the individual.
So we have a very different way of thinking in functional medicine, which is actually looking at how the body affects the brain. And that is really a fundamental insight that I had once I started treating patients for their physical problems. Their mental problems got better, their ADD went away, their autism improved, their depression went away, their anxiety went away, their panic attacks went away. And I thought, wow, this is something that nobody's talking about, how our body affects our brain. And the first thing to do when you have mental illness, when you have ADD, when you have depression, dementia, any of these things, is to start to treat the foundation. There may be psychological issues, there may be trauma and stress, but those things are much easier to deal with once you've built the foundation of health. Our approach to disease in general and to brain disorders is descriptive. So we say, oh, you have memory loss, you failed these neurocognitive testing, you have these symptoms, you must have dementia. Or you can't focus, pay attention, and you're distractible, and you have all these symptoms, that means you have ADD. And our entire diagnostic and statistical manual, which is what's used by psychiatry, is descriptive. It's basically, here's the list of symptoms you have, here's what you have. But just because you know the name of the disease doesn't mean you know what's causing it. And you can have 10 people with depression, or 10 people with autism, or 10 people with dementia, and all of them have different reasons for those symptoms. I always say your brain has only so many ways of saying ouch, but there are a lot of things that can hurt it, and if we identify those, we can really help people. So the fundamental problem with conventional medicine is that we describe disease by symptoms and not causes. This 8-part docuseries dives deep into some of our biggest brain disorders, including ADHD, or attention deficit disorder, autism, dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, MS, and much more. You'll hear from over 50 experts in medicine and brain health who will talk about the root causes of these devastating disorders and discuss a revolutionary new method for treating our broken brains that is based on cutting-edge science and medicine. This method marks a radical departure from classic psychiatry and neurology and the outdated methods that those fields typically use to treat their patients.
Food is one of the most important interventions, but whenever we think of people here at Amen Clinics, we always think of people in 4 circles. So we look at their biology. So that's where diet comes in. It's also where the scans come in, and also where if you had a head injury, that comes in there. We look at their psychology, how they think. We look at their social circle, who do you hang with? Because people are contagious. You become like the people you spend time with. And there's a spiritual circle, which is, why are you on the planet? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? So whenever we intervene with someone, we have biological interventions, food, exercise, nutrients. Psychological interventions, learn to not believe every stupid thing you think. Thoughts lie, they lie a lot. They're social interventions. Who do you hang out with? Let's assess that. And there's spiritual interventions. Why do you care? And when we use those 4 circles, people get better.
The Broken Brain docuseries will show you the new landscape of how brain function, mind, mood, and behavior are created by changes in your body and your biology. I want to show you how I use that information to cure or dramatically improve the rising tide of broken brains, including conditions like depression, anxiety, bipolar disease, psychosis, attention deficit disorder, autism, dementia, Parkinson's disease, and much more. If you don't have one of these diseases and feel, quote, fine, that is still less than what you could feel. You should and can feel alert, focused, happy, energetic, unstressed, and mentally sharp. That is if you know how to care for your brain. That is what we will teach you in this docuseries. My goal for all of you is to live your life as if you are meant to live it. A life full of energy, vitality, pleasure, and happiness. Brain function is directly influenced by what you eat, by nutritional deficiencies and allergens, hormonal imbalances, infections, toxins, and stress. In episodes 7 and 8, we will go through each of the reasons for a broken brain to create what I call the 7 steps to an ultra mind. The solution to this epidemic is getting to the root of the problems by explaining how our ancient genes interact with our modern environment to create systemic imbalances that affect our most prized and sensitive organ, our brains.
We are at the forefront of the evolution of neurology, like what is possible with healing in the brain. I am so excited for that. Everybody should be doing these things because we don't want to wait until someone develops Alzheimer's or dementia, because that's kind of like the end game, right? We want to make sure we catch those things earlier on. But the exciting thing is, even if it is end game, there's things we can do to reverse that. And so there's things we can do early on to just make sure we have brain health, because everyone talks about cardiovascular health, right? We want to make sure that our heart's healthy, and so we exercise, we change our diets, and we do all these wonderful things. But the brain, the same thing, the brain can respond to those things as well. There's this radical new field. It's been around in the scientific communities for a long time called epigenetics. And that just speaks to our ability to take control of our health. And that applies to the brain as well. And we can do things like change our diet. We can change the way we think about things, our mindset. We can make changes in lifestyle. We can exercise more. We can connect more with our loved ones. All those things have been proven to actually slow, stop, and even reverse any type of neurodegeneration. Things that are good for the heart are also good for the brain, right? Things such as exercise and diet, lifestyle, specific supplements, stress management. But the brain is unique. Not only does it respond and require nutrition to thrive, but it also needs exercise and activation.
The last 20 years of scientific research in the field of the brain and what makes it happy or sad, anxious or calm, focused or inattentive, remember or forget, has uncovered a few simple underlying factors that explain why things go wrong and how to fix them. But it can take more than 20 years for scientific findings like these to be incorporated into most physicians' practices. And it may take even longer since they threaten the very foundation of our scientific paradigm of disease. You don't have to wait another 20 years to take advantage of what we know now. What the last 20 years of scientific research has revealed is that our troubles with mood, behavior, attention, and memory don't come from bad luck or bad parenting or bad genes, but from imbalances in a few key underlying systems in the body. Helping people balance these key systems is the foundation of my medical practice. It is what I did to fix my broken brain, and it is how I have helped thousands of patients from all walks of life achieve a state of health they never dreamed possible.
About 2 years ago, I had just finished a series of fertility treatments, and the last treatment wasn't successful, and I was upset and decided to go visit my parents in Canada. I lived in India at the time, and fully with the intention of going back to India, but after about 2 weeks, I started getting debilitating anxiety. The anxiety was so bad that I couldn't get out of bed. I would have panic attacks. I would sweat profusely, and I was scared for my life. And my parents obviously were concerned of my state, and they took me to a doctor, my local family doctor, and she asked me a series of questions, and she prescribed me an anti-anxiety medicine, which was Effexor. Started at a very low dose, started at 0.25 milligrams and went up to 225 milligrams. Each day for me was excruciating. I used to beg my parents to do something. It was almost like I was suicidal. I used to go to the doctor on a daily basis because she kept increasing the dose, but she was only able to increase it every week or every 10 days. And I had no relief. And I was lucky one day, I was watching TV and I came across Dr. Mark Hyman's clinic. So I went online and did some research, and that's it. I don't know what happened. Something just hit me, and I said, this is going to help me.
I witness miracles every day, and I want those miracles to occur for you too. So join me for the next 7 episodes of the Broken Brain docuseries and reclaim your health and your brain. In episode 2 of the Broken Brain docuseries, we talk about the mind-body connection, or more specifically, the gut-brain connection. The truth is that most diseases that impact our brain don't always start in the brain. In fact, they often start in the gut. This discovery completely changes our understanding of brain health and how to treat brain disorders. We'll show you how optimizing your gut function can actually change your brain. I'll see you there. If you're finding this series to be helpful, help us spread the message and continue our mission by sharing this docuseries with your friends and loved ones. You can do this by clicking the link below. There are so many people out there who are suffering from a broken brain. Help us get this important information to them by sharing this docuseries with your community.